At my sister's engagement dinner, there was only one seat left for me, beside the service door. My father raised his glass to celebrate her future, then looked at my boyfriend and said, "So you're still dating the mechanic." I kept my eyes on my plate until a man across the table stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He stared at Daniel like he'd seen a ghost, and in that second, the room my family controlled for years stopped belonging to them. My name is Emma, and before that night, I had spent most of my adult life learning how to make myself smaller in beautiful rooms. I grew up in a family that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Hale, built luxury hotels and high-rise condos across the East Coast. My mother, Vivian, was one of those women who always looked as if a camera might appear at any second. She sat on charity boards, hosted fundraisers, and had a talent for making every conversation sound polished, even when it was cold. My sister Claire was 3 years older than me, and in our house, she was the answer to every question no one had even asked yet. She was poised, strategic, sharp in meetings, and already leading development deals before she turned 35. I was the other daughter. That did not mean my parents hated me. It was stranger than that. Hatred is loud. What I lived with was quieter. It was the slow ache of being treated like the least impressive version of what a daughter could be. I taught art at a public middle school in Newark. I loved my job. I loved the chaos of it, the paint on the tables, the kids who walked into my classroom carrying too much for their age, then sat down and built something with their hands that made them feel seen for an hour. I made just enough to pay my bills, not enough to impress anyone at my parents' dinner table. Some months I bought sketchbooks and markers with my own money because I couldn't stand telling a kid with talent that we had run out of paper. My father called it a phase for years, even after it clearly wasn't a phase. My mother preferred the word adorable. She used it the way other people used unfortunate. Claire never had to explain her life. I always did. At family dinners, Dad asked her about closing timelines, investor pressure, and zoning approvals. He asked me whether I had thought about doing something more sustainable. Sustainable never meant emotionally. It meant profitable. It meant visible. It meant something he could say out loud to his friends without changing his tone. The worst part was not the criticism. It was the calibration. They knew exactly how to wound without creating a scene. When one of my student programs won a city award for improving attendance, my mother sent a thumbs-up emoji in the family group chat 6 hours later. When Claire was featured in a business magazine, they rented a private room at a restaurant and invited half the city. I still remember standing in my kitchen after that article came out, looking at photos of her on social media in a white dress and a clean smile, with my parents on either side of her like she had fulfilled a contract I never even understood. There is a kind of child who grows up in a house like that and becomes rebellious. I didn't. I became careful. I learned to read the room before I entered it. I learned which stories from my day could survive my father's silence, which hopes could make it past my mother's polite smile. I learned that if I shared too much joy, someone would hold it up to the light and show me why it was smaller than Claire's. That kind of family system does something to a person. It teaches you that love is not given. It is graded. It teaches you that your place in the room depends on what you can display. After enough years, you don't just expect judgment from other people. You begin editing yourself before anyone else gets the chance. I noticed it most on the day of my students' gallery show. I had spent weeks helping them prepare. Some of those kids had never seen their work on a wall before. I sent my parents the invitation a month early. My father replied the afternoon of the event to say he had a dinner that could not be moved. My mother never replied at all. That evening, while I was helping a 12-year-old straighten the label beside her charcoal drawing, Claire posted photos from one of Dad's new hotel openings. She stood under a gold chandelier in a dress that probably cost more than my rent. My parents were smiling beside her, and I remember driving home alone with a box of leftover cookies on the passenger seat, asking myself a question I did not know how to answer. How many times can a person be overlooked before they begin to help with the disappearing? Claire saw more than she admitted. Every now and then she would text, "I know Dad is hard on you, or Mom doesn't mean it like that." But she never once interrupted a moment that benefited her. She never gave back any of the light. She liked peace, and in our family, peace usually meant I absorbed the discomfort so everyone else could keep speaking in calm voices. Then I met Daniel. I met him in the least cinematic way possible. My car started making a grinding sound on the highway, and I took it to a neighborhood repair shop after work. Daniel was under the hood of another car when I walked in. He wiped his hands on a rag, listened to the sound my car was making, and asked me 3 questions no one else had bothered to ask. He explained the issue without talking down to me. He was calm, direct, and kind in a way that never felt performative. I stayed longer than I needed to that day. First, we talked about the car, then the neighborhood. Then why public schools always seemed to run on people who cared more than the system deserved. On our 3rd date, he told me he liked fixing things because machines were honest. If something was broken, you could trace the problem, test your assumptions, and rebuild. He said people were harder because they could call damage love and expect you to thank them for it. I think I fell in love with him somewhere between his steadiness and the way he never asked me to defend my own life. Daniel drove an older truck. He wore work boots most days. He had grease under his nails more often than not. He laughed easily, tipped well, showed up on time, and listened with his whole face. None of that impressed my parents. They had decided what he was before he ever shook their hands. The first time Dad met him, he asked whether Daniel planned to do something more stable in the future. It was such a ridiculous question that I almost laughed. My father had built an empire on aggressive deals, political risk, and timing. But in his mind, a man who worked with engines was unstable, while a man who gambled on city permits was visionary. My mother was subtler. She always was. She took me aside once and said, "Emma, I'm sure he's a good person, but are you thinking long-term?" She spoke as if I were considering adopting a stray impulse, not building a life with someone I loved. What neither of them knew was that Daniel owned the shop where we met, and 3 others, and then 6 more through a holding company he rarely mentioned. He had started with 1 bay, 1 employee, and a loan he took after spending years fixing fleet vehicles for companies that never remembered his name. He kept the business quiet because he hated people changing their tone once they smelled success. He preferred truth before performance. He liked knowing how people treated him when they thought he could do nothing for them. That detail mattered, not just because it made the twist sweeter, because it revealed the poverty in my parents' judgment. They saw a pair of work boots and assumed limitation. They saw grease and mistook it for lack. There are people who think class is discernment, when really it is just arrogance in a tailored jacket. They do not know how to see dignity until money translates it for them. 5 days before Claire's engagement dinner, she texted me close to midnight. Please don't make anything awkward on Saturday. Dad is already stressed about Daniel. I read the message 3 times. It was so small, and yet it told me everything. She did not ask whether I was okay. She did not say she was sorry for how they had treated me. She did not even pretend to be neutral. What she wanted was order. She wanted the kind of peace where the right people remained comfortable. I replied, I wasn't planning to make a scene. That part was true. By then, I had years of practice surviving in rooms built for someone else. I knew how to smile lightly, answer briefly, and let an insult land without giving it the spectacle it wanted. That is what people do when they are trained by conditional love. They become experts in reducing themselves before anyone else has to bother. There is damage in that kind of training. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a woman who second-guesses every accomplishment before she shares it. Sometimes it looks like a daughter who brings the person she loves to a family event and spends the whole ride there apologizing for a coldness he has not even experienced yet. Sometimes it looks like silence so practiced that other people mistake it for calm. On the night of the dinner, the rooftop was dressed to look effortless. Warm lights, pale flowers, soft jazz, servers moving like they had been rehearsed. The skyline behind us looked expensive and far away. Every detail said celebration. Every detail said status. And then there was my place card, set near the service entrance as if even on paper I needed to know where I ranked. Daniel noticed it before I did. He looked at the seat, then at me, and I could tell he was deciding whether to say something. I shook my head. Not because it didn't hurt. because I didn't want to spend one more night proving that disrespect had happened in order for it to count. Dinner moved the way those dinners always do. Claire glowed. Her fiancé smiled on cue. My mother praised the flowers. My father told a story about perseverance that was really about himself. I spoke when spoken to. Daniel stayed calm beside me, one hand resting near mine under the table, not gripping, just there. Then my father stood up with his champagne glass and tapped it gently. The room softened around him the way it always did. He praised Claire's ambition, her judgment, her future. He called her a daughter any parent would be proud to claim. Then, with that same polished smile, he looked toward me. "And you're still with the mechanic." He said it lightly, like a joke that should be shared. A few people gave the thin laugh of those who do not want to be the only ones not laughing. My face stayed still. Years ago, I might have tried to explain. That night, I simply lowered my eyes to my plate and cut into food I could no longer taste. Then a chair scraped hard across the floor. Claire's future father-in-law, Victor Lang, was staring at Daniel with complete disbelief. Wait, that's Daniel Mercer. The jazz stopped before the band even meant to stop. Half the room turned. My father blinked once, then again. My mother looked from Victor to Daniel as if a hidden panel in the wall had opened, and she was not prepared for what was behind it. Victor took a step forward. Daniel, Mercer Fleet and Otto. Daniel stood slowly. He did not smile. He did not enjoy it. That was what made the moment feel even larger. He had no hunger to perform victory. He only looked tired of the lie everyone else had been living in. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice even. "But I didn't come here to discuss my company." You could feel the room waiting for my father to recover. He tried. He always did. "Well," Richard said, "we had no idea." "No," Daniel cut in, still calm. "You had every chance to know. You just never asked anything that wasn't filtered through your own assumptions." No one moved. He looked at my parents, then at Claire, then back at my father. "For 1.5 years, you've treated me like I was beneath your daughter because I work with my hands. And the bigger problem is, you've treated Emma that way for much longer." I stopped breathing for a second. Because that was the real reveal. Not that he had money. Not that he owned businesses. The real reveal was that someone in that room had finally chosen the truth over the choreography. Daniel kept going. "Do you know why she hardly talks about herself around you? Because every time she tries, you teach her that what matters to her is small. She spends her days helping kids no one invests in. She gives them patience, structure, and hope. And somehow you've managed to make her feel like that counts for less than a headline or a title." My mother's eyes filled immediately. My father looked furious, but not with the moral authority of an innocent man. It was the fury of exposure. Victor spoke next, and his voice landed like a verdict. "I thought I was joining my family to yours because I believed we shared values. But if this is how you speak to your own daughter, in public, on a night meant to celebrate family, then I need to rethink what exactly we're celebrating." That was when the shame in the room changed shape. Until then, my parents had been comfortable humiliating me because humiliation is cheap when there are no consequences. But social shame is different. Social shame arrives late, after tenderness has already failed. Some people do not stop hurting others when they realize someone is in pain. They stop when the pain begins to stain their own reputation. Dad started talking, too fast now. It was a misunderstanding. It was a joke. Things had been taken out of context. I finally stood. "No," I said. "Nothing was taken out of context. You meant it. You have meant it for years." Every face in the room was turned toward me. But for the first time in my life, that did not make me want to disappear. I looked at my sister. "You always knew what they were doing. You just preferred that I absorb it quietly so nothing would ruin your moment." Claire started crying then, which might have moved me once. That night, it didn't. I looked at my parents. "You don't get to act surprised because someone important finally heard you say out loud what you've been showing me my whole life." My father opened his mouth again, but there was nothing he could say that would make the last 10 years untrue. Daniel reached for his jacket. Not to lead me, to stand with me. "We're leaving," I said. No one stopped us. We walked through the hotel lobby and out into the cold night air. The city looked cleaner outside than it had from the rooftop. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Daniel asked, "Are you okay?" And the honest answer rose before the polite one could. "No, but I think this is the first time I've ever felt free." He nodded as if he understood exactly what kind of sentence that was. Not triumph, not even relief yet, just oxygen. On the drive home, I kept replaying the moment he spoke, not because he rescued me, but because he named something I had been living inside for so long that I had stopped calling it what it was. There are people who love you by making your life easier. Then there are people who love you by standing close enough, steadily enough, that your own voice comes back. Daniel never tried to become my answer. He only refused to let me vanish in front of him. 3 days later, Claire called. She sounded wrecked. Her fiancé wanted to postpone the wedding. Victor had told him he needed time to think about whether he wanted to tie himself to a family that treated people that way. A development partnership my father had been counting on was suddenly frozen. 2 investors had backed away. My mother had quietly stepped down from an arts board after word started moving through the same circles she once ruled so easily. I listened without interrupting. Then Claire said, "I know this is bigger than the dinner." That was the first honest thing I had heard from her in years. 2 days after that, my mother called. Her voice was careful in a way I had never heard before. "Your father and I want to talk." I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want to talk because you understand what you did? Or because now it's costing you something?" Silence. Then she said, "Both." I almost said no. A part of me wanted to protect the clean distance I had finally found, but another part of me knew I did not need to avoid the conversation anymore. Avoidance had once been survival. Now I had options. So I went. My parents' house looked exactly the same. Same stone entryway, same polished floors, same flowers arranged by someone who did not live there. I remember thinking how strange it was that a house could stay unchanged while everything inside it had shifted. My father looked older, not dramatically, just less certain, which on him felt like age. My mother sat straight, but not elegantly, more like someone holding herself together by habit. Claire was there too. Dad started first. He said he had always wanted the best for me. He said he thought pressure would motivate me. He said he worried I was underestimating myself. I let him finish. Then I said, "Respect that only appears when someone's resume improves was never love." That landed harder than anything louder could have. My mother cried. Real tears this time, not the polished kind offered when consequences arrive in public. She said she thought highlighting Claire would push me to want more. She said she never realized how deep it had gone. "You never realized it," I said, "because it benefited the version of family you preferred to show people." Claire admitted something I had known for years but needed to hear plainly. She said she had been afraid to challenge them because she liked what their approval gave her. She said every time she stayed quiet, it became easier to stay quiet again. That is how damage spreads in families. Not only through the person who wounds, but through the person who learns to live comfortably beside the wound. I told them I was not there for a dramatic apology. I was there to decide whether any relationship between us could exist without repeating the same structure. "If you want me in your life," I said, "this doesn't get fixed with 1 dinner and 3 speeches. We go to family therapy. We talk honestly. We stop ranking human worth by money, title, and usefulness. And the next time any of you speak to me with contempt, I leave. Not for a week, not to make a point. I leave because that door will already have been explained." No one argued. For once, the room did not rush to protect comfort. My father nodded first, slowly, like a man agreeing to terms he never thought would be offered to him by his own daughter. My mother nodded through tears. Claire whispered yes. I did not feel healed. Healing is too neat a word for something that uneven. What I felt was steadier than that. I felt returned to myself. A lot of people think justice always looks loud. They imagine revenge, collapse, humiliation in the opposite direction. But sometimes justice is much quieter. Sometimes it is simply this: the people who taught you to question your worth sitting across from you while you state it clearly, and for once, no one interrupts. I don't know what our family will become. Therapy doesn't erase history. Regret doesn't rebuild trust overnight. Some fractures never disappear. But not every ending has to be built from destruction alone. Sometimes the real ending is that the person who was always expected to shrink finally takes up her full space. And everyone else has to decide whether they are willing to meet her there. That night at the engagement dinner changed my life, not because my boyfriend turned out to be wealthy, and not because my parents were embarrassed in front of important people. It changed my life because the lie I had been handed for years stopped sounding believable. I was never the lesser daughter. I was just the one they had trained themselves not to see. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped asking them for permission to matter.